Have you ever wondered what it felt like to watch the sky simply refuse to stop? Not a single afternoon storm, not a passing shower, but days, one after another, where the clouds never broke, the ground never dried, and the world seemed to dissolve into gray water and mud. For a modern person, a week of rain means canceled plans and a few extra streaming subscriptions. But for a human living 40,000 years ago, with no walls, no waterproof roof, and no dry change of clothes, a week like that could mean the difference between life and death. So, what did they actually do? The first thing to understand is that ancient humans weren't caught off guard the way we might imagine. Long before written history, communities had already learned to read the sky. Certain cloud formations, wind shifts, and even the behavior of animals were early warning systems. Birds flying low, insects going quiet, a strange stillness in the air. These were signals passed down through generations, the same way we might check a weather app today. But knowing rain was coming didn't mean they could stop it. It just meant they had time to prepare. Shelter became the first priority. In many regions, humans didn't rely on flimsy huts that could collapse under days of soaking. They used caves, rock overhangs, and dugout shelters lined with animal hides. Archaeological sites across Europe and Asia show fire pits built deep inside cave mouths, positioned specifically to stay dry even when the entrance was soaked through. But here's the strange part: shelter wasn't just about staying dry, it was about staying warm enough to survive the cold that came with prolonged wet weather. Wet skin loses heat far faster than dry skin, and hypothermia doesn't need a blizzard to become deadly. It can happen at temperatures most of us would call mild if the body stays damp long enough. This is where fire became something closer to sacred. Keeping a flame alive through a week of rain wasn't easy. Wet wood doesn't burn well, and a dead fire in the middle of a storm could be catastrophic. So ancient humans developed rituals around fire maintenance, not for tradition alone, but survival. Dry kindling was stored inside shelters, sometimes wrapped in bark or buried in ash to keep moisture away. Some evidence suggests communities took turns feeding the fire through the night, an early form of shift work born purely out of necessity. But surviving the cold and wet was only half the problem. Food was the other. Hunting became nearly impossible when the ground turned to mud and visibility dropped. Many prey animals also took shelter, making tracking even harder. So, what did ancient humans eat during these long wet stretches? The answer lies in something surprisingly modern: preparation. Long before refrigeration, humans had already discovered smoking, drying, and fermenting food to preserve it. Meat could be smoked over fire and stored for weeks. Nuts, seeds, and roots could be gathered and kept dry inside shelters. In coastal or river communities, shellfish were sometimes stockpiled, since they required no elaborate preservation and stayed edible for several days. This meant that when the rain came, it wasn't panic, it was patience. Communities had likely already built a buffer, expecting exactly this kind of disruption, but surviving physically was only part of the challenge. What about the mind? Being trapped indoors for days with limited light and no clear end in sight creates a very specific kind of psychological pressure. Modern research on isolation and confinement shows that humans in these conditions often experience heightened anxiety, restlessness, and even short bouts of depression. It's reasonable to assume ancient humans felt something similar. So, how did they cope? Some anthropologists believe this is where early storytelling became essential. Trapped together with nothing but firelight and time, groups likely passed the hours through shared stories, chants, or communal problem solving. This wasn't just entertainment, it strengthened social bonds, which in survival terms were just as important as fire or food. A cohesive group was a group more likely to survive the next crisis together, and there's something oddly beautiful about that. The same instinct that makes us binge a show during a storm today may trace back to ancestors huddled in a cave, waiting out the rain by telling each other stories to stay sane. Eventually, the rain would stop, the sun would return, and the group would step outside into a transformed landscape: mud where there was once dry earth, swollen rivers, fresh growth already beginning to emerge. They would rebuild. They would hunt again. They would dry out their shelters and restock their fires. But the week of rain would leave its mark, not just on the land, but on how that community prepared for the next storm. Because if there's one thing ancient humans understood better than we often give them credit for, it's this: survival was never just about outlasting nature, it was about learning from it every single time it tested them.